Welcome to this new edition of Spooky Reviews from Spooky Ventures. This time around, we're going to look at three things, actually four things, that on the surface seem like they might not be connected, but they really are. First is it's five things now that I think about it. The two Night Stalker movies, Night Stalker and The Night Strangler, the Night Stalker TV series, and a movie called The Norliss Tapes, and a movie called The Curse of the Black Widow. Now, you might ask, what connects all these things? Well, the Kolchaks are obvious, but the Norliss Tapes and The Curse of the Black Widow also involve Dan Curtis, who was the producer of the first Night Stalker movie. He was producer and director of Night Strangler. And the same basic thematic presence of an outsider investigating some sort of supernatural thing while the police are trying to cover it up is present in all of these projects. So I would put forth that there's sort of variants on a theme in a lot of ways. And they all involve Dan Curtis. Well, the Kolchak TV series didn't involve Dan Curtis, but he was there at the formation, and actually there was talk about having him do the series. He wasn't interested, and I believe Darren McGavin wanted full control of the show if he was going to do it. Dan Curtis thought it would just be a nightmare to do the series, so we'll talk more about that in a bit. But in any event, that's what we're looking at this time. Dan Curtis involved projects in the whole theme of the outsider investigator or journalist researching supernatural stuff while the police are trying to cover it up. And, there's always a series of killings pretty much in all of these too. So it's that concept. First, let's look at the one that came out first chronologically, which is The Night Stalker. This was a made-for-TV movie from ABC that came out in 1972, and it was produced by Dan Curtis, and he had originally been best known before that for doing Dark Shadows back in the 60s, which of course introduced a vampire character, Barnabas Collins. Well, this movie features Darren McGavin as his first appearance as Carl Kolchak, who's a reporter who, he follows the story. He isn't necessarily a believer in supernatural, although he certainly latches on pretty quickly once it's presented to him in the face. And, in later events, he's a lot quicker to believe. But in any event, he's the reporter. You've got a number of other people. Simon Oakland, most notably as Tony Vincenzo, his boss, and Claude Akins plays the sheriff. Interestingly enough, Claude Akins takes on that same role in the Norliss Tapes later from Dan Curtis. So, and he's you've got him trying to cover up some details about a series of murders, and Carl Kolchak comes up with the idea that there's a vampire involved, and no one wants to believe him, of course, because who's going to believe a vampire in modern America? And the movie got the highest ratings of any TV movie at the time, and in fact it held that title for a very, very long time, quite a few years anyway. So it was a very well-received film, and it still holds up well today. You can get it on Blu-ray and DVD, and it's a great movie, actually. I don't know. I mean, even for looking at it in today's eyes, yes, it's a little dated and all, but it's a darn good movie. And it introduced Kolchak's character, which it came from a book or short story from Richard Matheson, and Kolchak's character is he's different. He's flawed, let's put it that way, but he's also a very likable guy, and You will just have to see these if you haven't already. I know it was funny. I remember as a kid growing up with Kolchak and that, but there are a lot of people around today who have never seen or even heard of these things. So if you haven't checked it out, be sure and seek that out. And in fact, I advise you to seek out everything I talk about in this set and give it a watch and see what you think. I mean, things like the X-Files wouldn't exist without Carl Kolchak, for sure. It kind of started a lot of this whole investigation thing with the cover-up going on and all. A lot of that mythology, as far as I know, started with Kolchak. Now let's look at the next movie to come out in sequence, which was The Night Strangler. Now, The Night Strangler came out the following year, and it was a direct sequel. This time, Dan Curtis was also on board, and Darren McGavin was still there. Now, the first movie had been set in Las Vegas. At the end of the first movie, Kolchak gets run out of Vegas. He winds up in Seattle, along with Carl Vincenzo, his boss. They both got run out of town, I guess. And this time he comes up against a different kind of immortal creature that's again killing people and leaving a trail of bodies, and no one believes. And the cops are again trying to cover it up. This one was almost as popular on TV as The Night Stalker, but not quite. But it came in pretty close. And it does more to develop the character, and it's I don't know. To me, it's perhaps not quite as good a film. It tends to lag a little bit in the middle, but it's still a lot of fun, and it was clearly the two movies together is what convinced ABC to go with a TV series, which I don't think anybody involved in the project was all that gung ho about. I think that they realized that it was going to be kind of a lot of work to do a TV series of something like that, particularly at the time for special effects and things. And I think they were probably right ultimately. Well, we'll talk about that when we get to the TV series. But they really did set the tone for both movies. Set the tone for what was to come in more than just the TV series, but in a lot of other things that were to come afterwards that were inspired by Kolchak. That brings us to the TV series of Kolchak, The Night Stalker. Now, Dan Curtis was not involved in the TV series. Apparently, he thought that the show shouldn't be made into a series, that it just would be too difficult to do a weekly series of it. But instead, Darren McGavin himself became the producer of the show, although I don't think he was credited as such. In any event, it was a pretty short-lived show. There were a lot of rumors of problems going on the set where I guess McGavin would have to do last-minute rewrites on the episodes, plus produce, plus direct, and it just got to be too much of a grind on him. He didn't want to do it anymore, or at least so I've heard. But in any event, it's a legendary show. Like I said, I've recently found that some people have never seen it. Now, both the Night Stalker movies and the Kolchak series are available for home video. You can pick up the entire series of Kolchak for pretty reasonable price at Amazon or elsewhere, I'm sure. But in any event, you've got Kolchak was there for the series, so was Vincenzo, and each episode was kind of the same theme of Kolchak the reporter digging into things of the supernatural variety, generally linked to a series of murders, and the police wanting to cover everything up. They had moved it, though, to Chicago because he'd gotten kicked out of the other city at the end of the previous movie, so the whole series is set in Chicago. There were only what, maybe 14 episodes, something like that. Oh, I'm sorry, there were 20 episodes. So you've got 20 episodes, one season, and it's legendary. I mean, even Chris Carter said it was an influence on the X Files, which, I mean, seems kind of obvious if you watch them both. So that's pretty much that. There were a lot of great guest stars on the show. It's something that has withstood the test of time, and given that it shouldn't have been in syndication at the time because there weren't enough episodes, the very fact that it still has life today just shows you how strong it is. The Norliss tapes came out in '73. Now it's interesting that Dan Curtis didn't think that the Kolchak series was something that should have been developed into a series, because with the Norliss tapes, the pilot movie was in fact designed to be the pilot for a series, and the ending's kind of a cliffhanger that sets up for a series. Um, Now you've got another guy. This guy's working on a book. I don't know if he's actually a reporter or what, but he's working on a nonfiction book debunking the supernatural, which basically makes him a reporter type journalist who's right there with Kolchak. Now this came out in '73, so it actually predates the TV series of Kolchak. And Norliss he's missing at the beginning of the show, and the entire story is told through a series of tapes that he's left about his adventure. It's actually pretty similar in some ways to the zombie episode of Kolchak. Again, the police are trying to prevent him from getting the story out there because they're trying to cover up the supernatural aspects of it. You've got in the lead role, you've got Roy Thinnis from known for the Invaders show. He was also in the Nightmare at 37,000 feet that I reviewed for the very first spooky review. And Angie Dickinson is also in it. Claude Akins, who showed up in the original Night Stalker movie as a cop, is a cop in this movie. So it's a pretty cool show. You'll find that some of the music even is either the same as or calls to mind the music from the Kolchak series, and some of the scenes really almost look like they could have been scenes from Kolchak. I mean, it just sort of looks like it was filmed almost to be Kolchak, but with some different characters involved. Now, Norliss's character tends to be a bit less, shall we say, eccentric than Kolchak. Although maybe to some degree it's because the character's a little less well-rounded, I think. He's not as fleshed out as Kolchak. Of course, when you've got 20 episodes and 2 movies to flesh out a character, he gets a little more real than when you have just one film. It's a good movie, though. Pacing's a little slow at times. I sort of liken it to the second Kolchak movie in that regard. So this one, I'm not sure if it's available for home video or not, but right now, anyway, you can stream it on YouTube. That brings us to 1977 and The Curse of the Black Widow. Now, the main character in The Curse of the Black Widow, who's Mark Higby, is played by Anthony Franciosa, and he is perhaps a bit more like Kolchak. Although he's a private investigator and not a journalist. Hey, he even drives a convertible Mustang just like Kolchak does. The story is very much the same. He's the outsider. He's got the connections to get the inside story. There's supernatural stuff, and the head of the police is covering it up. It's a very, I don't know, I think between the Norliss tapes and this one, I think I'd probably go with this one. It's a little more high energy. Some of the acting's a little weak at times, though. Not from Franciosa, some of the other characters. But which, by the way, it's a hell of a cast. You got Vic Morrow, you got Donna Mills, Patty Duke, June Lockhart, June Allison, Sid Caesar, Max Gale, Roz Kelly. There's just a lot of really well-known people in there, and but some of the acting just seems a little flat. The character's a little more well-rounded. He's a little more likable than Norliss was. All in all, it's a good movie, and it really now that what changed here is the music doesn't feel as much like Kolchak. Some of the scenes do though. There's some pacing and things very much like Kolchak. So, all of these things are sort of tied together by the basic outsider investigating supernatural with the police trying to shut down the investigation and keep it quiet. And I almost think they all could have been Kolchak stories. But really they could have. They just would have been written a little differently, but not much. It really sort of shows the direction Dan Curtis was going in for a while. That's a positive thing anyway. And this one, I don't know, again, if it's available on home video. I think at one time it was, but it might be out of print. However, you can probably find it online to stream as well. Of the two non-Kolchak ones, it's probably the better one, but I sort of already said that. So that's pretty much wraps up this edition of Spooky Reviews from Spooky Ventures. Stay tuned for more soon. Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.